Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this special webinar on International Memorial Day, Workers' Memorial Day. I'm Anna, and today we're going to be joined one by 4 speakers who are introduced shortly. We will be posting a recording of this webinar to YouTube later today, so don't worry if you miss anything, and we'll add subtitles to the recording when we post it. My colleagues will also be posting links and other resources in the chat panel on the right-hand side of the screen. So as I said, today is International Workers' Memorial Day, when we as trade unionists remember workers who've lost their lives, and at the same time we commit to keep the living safe. We will, as always, be joined by others around the world in doing this. This year, we especially remember the frontline workers who've lost their lives to COVID-19 while looking after our loved ones and keeping the country running. We remembered them this morning in the National Minute Silence, and we will be forever in their debt, and especially to those who've died during this pandemic, our nurses, doctors, care staff, transport workers, and other essential staff. So our first speaker will be Cheryl Walton, the General Secretary of the Royal College of Midwives. Please post any questions you may have for her in the Ask a Question panel, which you'll see underneath the screen here. And you can use the chat panel on the right-hand side to share your stories and your tips with each other. So first of all, over to Jill.
Hello, good afternoon. As the largest trade union representing midwives and maternity support workers, our number one priority is the health, safety and well-being of our members. But that's not just during this current crisis, that's every day, every month, every year. Of course, during this crisis, our focus is sharpened even further. We are so used to maternity services being places of joy, of welcoming new life into the world and seeing families grow. And that contemplating the potentially grave risks our members may face is really difficult. Well, we must do more now than just contemplate that. We must act, we must influence, and we must speak up where we believe our members are being let down. At the heart of everything is health and safety law. Whether we're in the middle of a once-in-a-generation crisis, as this is or not, that legislation is paramount. Regardless, and maybe even because of other pressures, employers still have a legal responsibility to assess and mitigate risk. That includes ensuring all staff have access to appropriate PPE. Earlier this month, the RCM signed a joint statement with the TUC calling on the lack of PPE for health and social care workers, a crisis within a crisis. The key workers keeping us safe and well should not be exposed to unreasonable, unnecessary risk by not being provided with the correct PPE. The RCM wants to see transparency around the procurement, the distribution, and exactly how and when workers can expect to get the protection they need and deserve. We want to help to fix this, but we need the government to be open, honest and transparent about the problems it is having. But protection is about more than just PPE. It's about having the right training and advice to manage whoever comes through the hospital or clinic door. An RCM survey of our workplace reps found that nearly a third of midwives had received no advice or training that they need to care for women with coronavirus symptoms. Employers have got to step up and treat their staff with care and respect. We are seeing great innovation in maternity services. It's incredible, with more integrated use of technology and the coaching of birth partners to provide the hands-on physical support. All over the country, despite ongoing staff shortages made worse by midwives and MSWs either having coronavirus themselves or having to self-isolate because someone in their household has symptoms, our members are stepping up to give women the best care and support they can in challenging circumstances. And I am incredibly proud of that. But what makes me hugely concerned is the government relying on that goodwill, on that determination to carry on caring without doing what they should have been doing since the beginning of this crisis. Why are we still not seeing proper testing regime that will allow people to come back to work more quickly? Why are staff being sent to testing centres miles from home or work and inaccessible by public transport? And why are we still hearing too many reports of a lack of access to appropriate PPE? Of course, simply being angry changes nothing. The RCM has taken a more practical approach, ensuring the voices and the concerns of our members are heard at the highest level and that we influence positive change. We ensured that PPE guidance was specific to those working in maternity services, both in clinical community settings. We secured death in service benefits for our members, and most importantly, we completed all of the four nations we have compelled all of the four nations to ring fence maternity services to ensure that midwives and maternity support workers were not redeployed to other areas. We will continue to hold employees' feet to the flames on this to protect our members and to protect the delivery of maternity services. There are, of course, battles we still need to fight. There is a growing bank of evidence to suggest an increased impact of COVID on BAME community, including within our health and social care workforce. We have to do more to understand this and to act accordingly. At the RCM, we are developing guidance to support members and employees alike to carry out appropriate risk assessments that cover all protected characteristics, including race and disability. We'll be working closely with our own BAME members to listen and to act on their concerns, as well as providing additional guidance to our workplace reps to enable them to be as effective as possible in dealing with localised issues. As with any trade union, our reps are our eyes and ears in the workplace. We know they're doing an extraordinary job in extraordinary times, and we are incredibly grateful for that. At a time when we cannot provide them with the usual face-to-face support, we are doing all we can to be there for them, virtually or at the end of a phone. We want to reassure them that even if we can't physically be there, they are not alone, we've got their backs. We know many of our members are going above and beyond, and thank you, including beyond the working hours, and too often those hours aren't recognised. In fact, the most recent NHS survey found that almost 80% of midwives do additional unpaid hours. That's why we are fighting to ensure every country in the UK pays overtime to all staff when shifts overrun or when additional hours over 37.5 are necessary. We want ministers to do more than create badges or stand and clap once a week to show that they care about the health and social care workforce. We want them to pay people properly for the hours they're working. These are without doubt worrying times, but we mustn't ignore the pockets of hope out there. Appreciation of the NHS and social care by the public has rarely been higher, personified not only by the weekly applause, but by today's respectful silence too. We have a deeper respect for key workers than ever before. We have seen communities grow virtually and sometimes from nothing. We have also seen positive change in the NHS. Rest areas for staff are being created and properly serviced. Flexible working is now an accepted possibility, and the combination of online and physical services is working. So often in the NHS, change can seem impossible. This crisis has proved that change can happen, and it can happen really quickly. We must ensure that when this is all over, some of these positive changes that can benefit our staff aren't lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jill. And I'm delighted to say that we've been joined by Frances as well now. We had a couple of issues just getting her online, but she is here with us now. So I'm going to hand over to Frances at TUC before I look at what questions you have been posting for them during Jill's brilliant and inspiring speech there. So Frances, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Anna. And I'm joining you by mobile phone, as it turns out, because the computer didn't work. But I am really, really proud to join you today. And it does give me that feeling personally. We are not alone. We may be in extraordinary circumstances, but here we are together making our voices heard on International Workers' Memorial Day. I also want to bring everybody solidarity from everybody at the TUC, including our Anna, who's hosting. And I want to just point out that on top of Anna's day job, she has been part of that sewers army, sewing up scrubs for healthcare staff in her local hospital. And for me, that sums up the spirit of the trade union movement, that we are can-do people. We don't just talk the talk. We also make that contribution. So thank you, Anna, and thanks to all our health and safety reps for everything that you're doing to keep people safe. And today is all about that right to work safely. As I said, this day, this Memorial Day feels like no other that I've ever experienced, because we know that all around the world, thousands and thousands of health care and key workers are putting their health and too often their lives on the line to help protect others and care for others, whether that's in the NHS, the care system, our railways, our transport system, posties, prisons, schools, supermarkets, right across the economy. We're seeing workers stepping up and doing something extraordinary. But, you know, words are one thing, and showing respect is important, including to the families of those who have been, who have lost family members. And I think we all felt that today when we joined the 1 minute silence, which, let's not forget, it was Unison, the RCM and other unions who campaigned for that 1 minute silence today. But we all showed our respects. And we know that we owe those workers who have lost their lives a huge, huge debt. But the best way we can repay them is by making sure that that never, ever happens again. You know, I have been clear that, as well as incredibly sad, frankly, I am incredibly angry about everything that this government has got wrong on PPE and testing. And I do think, and I've said it publicly, that there has been a grotesque failure. And for my part, I believe that's about a failure to plan, the failure of privatisation, of austerity, and sheer incompetence. And that's why the TUC has been calling for an independent public inquiry on PPE, so that we never, ever see this happen again. Now, we know that we're at, if you like, the beginning of planning for the next phase. Millions of workers have stayed at work throughout. Now, at some point, we don't know when, but millions of workers, stage by stage, will be expected to return to work, including workers that we know can be particularly vulnerable in this pandemic crisis, including that disproportionate impact on Black and ethnic minority workers, workers with disabilities, and pregnant women. So the TUC and the whole movement is saying very clearly that we know employers obviously already have a legal obligation to carry out risk assessments, but we need a risk assessment dedicated to dealing with this pandemic in every workplace. And what's more, that risk assessment has to have real union involvement and agreements. We have got, in many cases, because of what you've done as reps and officers, we've got good agreements with employers, but we know that there are too many other employers who frankly are behaving like scallywags. We've all seen the stories, we've all had the reports from workers about overcrowding in fast fashion retail warehouses, of a failure to provide proper sanitizer or even soap, of no care being given to how people get to work safely and get home safely afterwards. So we are demanding that there has to be proper union involvement, and that those risk assessments should be checked by one of our tens of thousands of health and safety reps, or by, where there are no unions, by a health and safety inspector. And we also are setting out tough demands on tough enforcement, because frankly, the record on prosecutions of bad employers isn't good enough. And we know that unless employers see that the consequences of inaction or bad treatment, bad behaviour are tough, then they'll just keep on getting away with it. So we want tough enforcement too. And we are reminding workers, again, nothing new about this. This is people's right in law, that you have a right to refuse to work if work is unsafe. And we're saying that not because we just want to throw our weight around. We're saying that because there is nothing more important than protecting people's health and safety, their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being at work. And because this is important for everybody's health, because if people feel forced into work that is unsafe when they should be staying at home because they've got symptoms or because they've got vulnerable members of their family, then that puts everybody's health at risk. And that's one of the reasons why we've been campaigning so hard for improvements in sick pay, so that the 2 million who currently don't earn enough to even qualify for sick pay get that protection, get that entitlement, and that we see improvements in the level of sick pay. Because as Matt Hancock himself admitted, he couldn't live on £95 a week. So why is anybody else expected to do that? And again, the problem is that if people are forced to choose between doing the right thing and staying at home when they have symptoms, or feeding their children, putting food on the table, then people in that position have no choice. So we've got to get that right too. So I just want to end by saying that for me, the most important thing here is that the best way to remember the dead is to organise for the living. We know that unions are people's best protection at work. We know that when there's a health and safety rep on site, that cuts the accident and injury rate by half. We know that it gives workers not just a voice, but dignity and real practical protection. So if there's one message today of all days, it's organise. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Frances. Thank you again to Gill. We've had some excellent, really inspirational speeches from you there. And what's been great to see is the number of comments in the chat. People are agreeing with you. We have had some questions posted that I'd like to just ask you a couple. We've had quite a lot, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can, but time permitting. So first of all, a question has come in asking, how can we unite to pressure government bosses and authorities to protect workers and public to the maximum? Frances, do you want to go first?
Well, just to say that I think it's always important to remember that our power comes from our members in the workplace, and we have to use that power. The best way that we get any action is by combining together through our trade unions. And, whether it's the 1 minute silence today, which, as I said, was a union campaign led by Unison and the RCM, and the RCM2 and other unions, supported by the TUC, or whether it's getting those practical agreements at work that make working lives better and safer, or whether it's finding other ways to protest. We have to be creative. We're doing a lot of protest work online, as well as taking our voice to the table, because, just as with employers, whatever the colour of the government in power, where decisions are being taken, I want the union voice in the room.
Thank you, Frances. Gill, have you got anything to add?
Well, just to build on that, really, I think if members and unions come together and speak with one voice on these issues, we absolutely know we have far more influence. So coming together as unions, supporting each other, really, really key, so that we can make sure we represent the members of the unions, workers, it's really important, and it's in everybody's best interest that staff are protected. And for healthcare staff, they're protected, and then they provide good healthcare to the population. And we are working together. I mean, that's obvious, isn't it? We are working together, and the minute silence is a really good example of that. So I have to just, back what Frances is saying. We have to do this together, and it will make a difference if we keep doing that.
Absolutely. Excellent point there. We've had another question about keeping the focus on workers' safety and keeping the reality of the issues that there are with PPE alive, even after the current crisis has lessened, because there may be a danger that attention shifts to other political issues. We all know that even before COVID-19 was with us, there were lots of political goings on, at the very least, with exiting from the EU. So how can we make sure that this stays forefront in people's minds? Frances, do you want to go first?
Only to repeat what I said before, there is obviously a load of sensitivity around the PPE issue. We've always said that we believe that health and social care staff are the priority. We need to get PPE to them, and anybody who saw the Panorama programme last night knows that there's a very important investigation that needs to happen there. But the truth is, key workers, all workers, need proper protection at work. And I keep hearing the government talk about, first of all, it was about a problem of global supply and demand. Then Unite, the union backed by Unison and many other unions, made that call to arms to manufacturers in the UK to start switching production and scaling up PPE production. Then those manufacturers were telling us that they kept sending emails to the government and never even getting a reply. Then the government said it was a problem of logistics and distribution. What is going on? And that's why the TUC made that call for a public inquiry. We understand we're in the midst of a crisis. My goodness, do we understand that? Because our members on the front line are the ones who are risking their health and lives in the midst of that crisis. So what we're saying is that by the end of this year, we need that independent public inquiry up and running. We're not going to let go of this. Many of us have been involved in supporting various truth and justice campaigns over our time. We know we have to be in it for the long haul, but I can tell you we are not going to let go of this one, because I think we want to be constructive, but we owe it to working people to hold politicians to account. We need truth and we need justice.
Thank you, Frances. Just to hand over to Gill, before I ask you for any final words before we bring on our next two speakers.
I just want to say, the safety of our members and all members of unions will always be our paramount concern. I mean, we have to listen to them about what's going on. So it's really important that we all continue to survey our members and continue to collect the intelligence that we need to influence the current situation, but keep our foot on the pedal for the future, and making sure we understand and learn from what has gone wrong now and make sure that it never happens again, which is what I think Frances has just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we have a couple of final words, just worth saying to you, Gill and Frances, because you possibly haven't been following the chat, but there's some people commenting that it's great to see an all-woman panel on a webinar. I would agree. So we are actually bringing on a male speaker next, but it is lovely to be part of an all-female panel for now. So just before we bring on our next speakers, any final words, Frances?
I don't know if you can hear me because the mic seems to be going. Can you hear me?
All good. All great.
No.
Yes. All good.
Well, I guess final thing I'd want to say is that, you know, whenever we do finally emerge from the worst of this crisis, at least, because I have to say, I think it's going to go on for some time, but at least when we get through the worst, that I would like to send a really strong message that there can be no return to business as usual. We do need a new deal for working people. And you know, people like Gill, all our union leaders are doing amazing work, but the real work we all know happens through our elected reps on the ground in workplaces and communities. We've got to win that new deal, that fair new deal for working people, and health and safety has to be at its heart.
Thank you very much, Frances. I appreciate how busy you are and how great it's been that you joined us today. So we'll say goodbye to you now, but please don't leave, everybody. We've got 2 more speakers coming up. So just over to Gill, and I'm sure Frances will hopefully see her again on a future webinar. Gill, over to you.
I was just going to say, I think a big thank you to all of the frontline workers, everybody. It's everybody, really. Everybody who's trying their best in a really difficult time. And that makes me feel really proud. We're all here together and we will keep on with the issues, and please talk to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gill. We appreciate how busy you are as well. So we'll say goodbye to you now. I'm just bringing our next speakers on screen. We've got Janet from the Hazards Campaign joining us. And we've also got James, who is a Unite workplace rep for a local bus company, and he is also on the Unite executive committee for the passenger sector. So amazing. Janet is already here with us. So while we're waiting for James to join us, I'm just going to hand over to Janet first of all to talk to us about the Hazards Campaign and some of the work they've been doing, and we'll be tuning in with James after that. So Janet, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this webinar. We are in extraordinary times, but you know, each year more people die in work than die in wars, and Britain kills about 140 people a day, 6 people an hour, and worldwide work kills nearly 3 million people every year. And International Workers' Memorial Day is a day we remember the 50,000 workers who die each year in the UK as a result of negligent employers, and an economic and political system which places profit before the lives of workers. This year, the Hazards Campaign is fighting for hearts and minds, and we're heartbroken. We're heartbroken that our sisters and brothers, that our mothers and fathers, that our children and grandparents have died and are continuing to die in foreseeable circumstances, foreseeable and preventable incidents, or because they've been exposed to toxic chemicals, dangerous substances, or diseases that kill them. Every year, the Hazards Campaign produces the whole story. And so to ensure that every death is counted and every death is made to count, we talk about, the HSC have put out a statement this morning talking about the 147 people who died last year as a result of work. That's the people that are reported under RIDDOR. But on top of that are the people, the workers that are killed at sea or in air crashes, the incidents of workers that are killed in railways, those workers that die by suicide because of the treatment that they experience in workplace, which can be, we estimate about 650 people each year are dying as a result of that. And members of the public that die as a result of workplaces, about 92 last year. And that's, you know, 1,500 people dying in incidents. But on top of that are the 50,000 people who die as a result of diseases and other illnesses that they've contracted because of work. And we try to tell the stories of the families about their loved ones, and Families Against Corporate Killers. Louise Taggart is a member of that, founder member of that, and she says that there are chilling parallels to the pandemic crisis which engulfs us all. Like the families of those who've died from the COVID-19, they didn't get a chance to say goodbye. Many of them didn't get that chance to say goodbye. Like them, we know the deaths of their loved ones could and should have been prevented, and like them, we know there will be no justice for their loss. As our posters say behind me, whether the threat at work is another new virus, dangerous substances, or heartbreaking demands, your lives should not be put on the line. No one should be made ill, no one should be injured, and no one should die as a result of work. And we stand on the shoulders of some of the movements, some of the health and safety giants of the movement, people like campaigner Tommy Hart, who brought International Workers' Memorial Day to this country in 1992, and that was adopted by the trade union movement. People like Dave Smith, who's campaigning to shut the sites to protect the non-essential construction workers. People like Hilda Palmer, who facilitates FAC with a passionate and tireless campaigning for the justice of families. And people like Rory O'Neill, the editor of the Hazards magazine and TUC Risks, who provide valuable support to reps with resources and research. And as he says, who lives and who dies is not work is not an accident of chance. Those at the top of the pecking order, the decision makers, don't just receive more money and perks, they get to live longer to enjoy them. And in the current crisis, many are exploiting and exposing working people to life-threatening situations, either through lack of PPE or non-essential work carrying on. And low pay goes hand in hand with poor and non-existent health and safety standards and increased occupational injuries and death. Virtually all health and safety risks, from stress to dust exposure to heavy loads, goes up as your pay goes down. And the workers at the bottom of the workplace pecking order are generally still women, the Black and ethnic minorities, the migrant workers, the young and disabled workers. And workers are being treated as disposable. The health and welfare and safety are disregarded and conditions at work non-existent as employers squeeze more profit or surplus out of organisations. And that's never been more clearer than through this pandemic. The Grenfell Tower inferno showed up the way safety regulation and enforcement has been beaten with a neoliberal stick to make it impotent. It's taken us decades to get to the point where Grenfell was possible. Who'd have thought after Grenfell we'll be here yet again facing an avalanche of lies, deceit, negligent employers, incompetent government strategies and policies, and HSE unwilling or unable to enforce the law that protects us in the workplace, leaving hundreds dead and many more that will suffer a lifetime of trauma and disability. The UK government, as we know, has one of the worst COVID-19 records in the world. Many deaths are not even being recorded as COVID deaths. So-called experts on TV decrying China and others for covering up the numbers when it's they who are covering up the numbers. They weren't testing everyone who died. They're abandoning care workers and residents isolated in their so-called care homes to die. Lockdown was delayed. Even how many non-essential workers, even now non-essential workers in highly populated workplaces where social distancing isn't possible is happening. Something we know from our Italian comrades that happened there and contributed to a huge loss of life. The PPE, has been said before, when it was provided, it was inadequate and not at the correct standard. You know, we talk about a precautionary approach to PPE, to precautionary approach to risks. And they willy-nilly changed the standards of PPE to suit what was available. And the testing strategy is built on lies. COVID-19 should and need not have killed so many if this government had acted quickly, if they provided the PPE necessary, if they'd taken that precautionary approach and closed non-essential workplaces, if they'd tested, traced and isolated, if they'd provided the finances needed to keep people isolated, if they'd acted more like any other socially responsible government, if they hadn't been attacking and undermining our trade unions, the NHS, social care, education, welfare provision, and the network of social support, if they hadn't slashed resources to the health and safety enforcement and public health. The only protection I see that workers have at this moment in time is the trade unions, and lots of those workers are not in trade unions. Not enough of them are in trade unions. As we've heard, if we're organised in trade unions, then we are twice as safe in our workplaces, and that's got to be at the centre of whatever we do in the future. So this day we remember the dead, remember all those people who've died at work, and we vow to ensure that we will all fight for a better society, better health, better safety, and improved working conditions, and place this government and those negligent employers on notice that we will hold you to account. We will remember the dead, and we will continue to fight for the living.
Thank you very much, Janet, for that inspirational speech. I don't know whether you can see James down in the little thumbnail video was applauding you, but that was amazing. And there were some incredibly supportive comments in the chat panel. Before I put a couple of questions to both of you that have come in from our viewers, I'm just going to bring James on screen so that we can get going with some of the questions that we've got for him. So as I mentioned before, James is a Unite rep at a local bus company and also a member of Unite's executive committee. So first up, James, can you tell us a bit? Hi, thank you for joining us. So hopefully you saw the start of the webinar where we talked a little bit about this morning's 1 minute tribute to workers who've lost their lives during COVID-19. So can you tell us a bit about how bus workers have observed that this morning in your experience, please?
Well, this morning I managed to get to my local garage, which was Camberwell. And as you know, Anna, because you joined us as well, which was brilliant. Really good to see you there. We came out and we stood on the major road. Buses were stopping and paying their tribute because, yes, we have lost a number of our brothers and sisters, especially in the transport sector. I believe at present, we have lost 27 bus drivers to date, which is phenomenal. It is phenomenal, and we're not talking about the people that are probably in hospital at this present moment, where parents can't even get to them, their kids can't even kiss them or hug them. So it's a horrible place to be, and I never thought I would have been there in my lifetime. So I know around the country, many of our bus workers have come out in the rain, stood outside their garages, outside their buses, and paid their tribute to the people over the years that have given their life to give us some of the health and safety that we have had and we are going to fight to keep.
Thank you, James. It is really sobering to hear that 27 bus drivers have lost their lives, and that sentiment is being echoed in the chat panel. But can you tell us a bit about what has happened regarding the protection of transport workers, especially on buses? What has happened so far to protect them?
Well, there has been a number of changes, but we've got to say, as everything, this pandemic caught everybody on the hop, and we're playing catch up all the time, and it's wrong. The companies, I know my company has worked very hard in working with our union to make sure that we protect as best we can the workforce coming in. But let's be honest, the government didn't make it easy for the people out there having to go to work, because companies can't legislate against people travelling to and from work, and that's probably where majority of people have caught the viruses, because they've had to go to work. They haven't had a choice because they can't afford to stay at home either. And there ain't been, the provisions have only just come into the bus companies now with the furlough in London, especially, not so much outside of London, for bus drivers. But yes, we are now getting together wipes. We have got sanitizers. But let's be fair, all of this stuff has been hard to get hold of, because rightfully so, the NHS has needed it, because they failed to stock the NHS to where it should have been. And that, to me, is a tragedy. So for us in the bus industry and many other industries, the shop workers are in the same boat. You now are chasing to try and get PPE for ourselves, and companies are wanting to get it, but there is no chance of them actually getting it because the orders are stacking up behind. Our government hasn't taken on companies that could be making PPE for us, and they've left them behind. So yeah, we have got on the buses. We've now got in London especially, the back door is the one door boarding now, so the front door has been sealed. Although we have got some front door buses only, and what's happening with them at the present moment is that they are adding extra seals to the driver's cab to make sure that the driver again is as safe as can be. So nobody is touching in from the front. They are, if they're loading it on front door only, they are going straight to the back. But outside of London, we have still got a problem with cash taking, because many of the drivers are putting their fears forward that they're having to take cash. Why in London can we have an oyster system, but the rest of England can't? Please, government, answer me that question, because that does wind me up.
Thank you, James. That is, of course, very inspirational, and you've highlighted some really important points for us there about changes that you have in your role as a workplace rep. You've been able to oversee being brought in and push for. Before we finish, I just wanted to ask you both for a few final words on what you think. How we can help safety reps be stronger in the workplace and be able to implement more changes. Just like a couple of points from each of you on that. So should we hand back to Janet first to see what she's got to add to that? Thanks, Janet.
The health and safety reps probably the most important role in the workplace. You know, we've got some really good legislation in place, and we've got to hold our employers to account using the legislation that we've got, making sure that there's risk assessments done that identify all the risks, and that we tell our management they've got to control those risks. It's their duty to control physical and mental risks, the risk to our physical and mental health. And you know, if we let them get away with not doing that in the current situation, they'll get away with it when it isn't the current situation. This is the most important thing at the moment. You know, we've got to say to them what controls that risk, and if they haven't put that in place, then we can't work. Then we shouldn't be working in that environment. We shouldn't be letting our employers make us ill and potentially kill us. You know, that's the bottom line. And so we've got to stand firm, and our trade unions have got to support us in doing that.
Thank you, Janet. Before I hand over to James just for his final few words, it just remains for me and everyone to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been incredibly inspirational, and it's been really heartening to see lots of links to the work that Hazards have been doing being posted in the chat, so everyone will be able to follow up on some of the points you've made to read a bit further. But thank you so much for joining us today, Janet. James, over to you about the last points about safety reps.
Well, our companies, many of the companies have allowed our safety reps to stand down, to work alongside the company to make sure that we're adhering as best we can to the government's guidelines. But we do need more safety. I think that the local authorities, TfL, should have its own stock of PPE for further, because we can't deal with what we're doing now. But we've got to think about, in the event something like this happens again, we should have a stock for the transport system. And like every other sector, they should have their own stock sitting there to make sure that if an event, something like this happens, we can roll it out and not have to worry about endangering people unnecessarily. We've got bus drivers being left at open places where they're not back at their garages. So washing their hands facilities is not that easy for them. So they have to take their meal reliefs on the street corners, which is wrong. We shouldn't be having that. So we have to look at bus drivers and the rotas that the bus drivers are doing to enable us to make sure that they finish at a place where they can wash their hands and keep themselves safe.
Thank you, James. It's been an incredibly inspirational webinar, I think, from all 4 speakers, and I'm really, really pleased you've been able to join us today. Thank you so much, James, and thank you for all the amazing work you're doing out in Camberwell and in South London in general. Okay, before we finish, it just remains for me to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us and for being so engaged in the chat panel. We hope you found it inspirational. Next week's webinar is going to be about employment rights and the job retention scheme. It will be on May the 5th. It is open for registration and you can sign up now. But before we go, we'd like to show a video made for today. This is the story of Peter, Mary, Cheryl, Zeeshan and Emeka, 5 UK workers who tragically have been taken by COVID-19. I'm going just to set up this video now and then play it for you. Just one second. My colleagues are also going to post in the chat the video for you to take a look at. Okay. So before I sign off, just look forward to seeing you again in the future. And this is the video I just mentioned.